Number 4, God himself could speak to him face to face. And here I dare to say, no amount of time with God could close the gap for one like him. Even God looked at the guy and said, it is not good for a man to be alone. Relationships that heal. Today, we are focused on healing from losses. We all have suffered loss. This could be a loss of things. This could be a loss of persons. But we all have suffered loss. Today, we are more concerned about the loss of people. How do we recover from that? Why is it so painful? Why do we struggle to move on? In the Garden of Eden, God created all things. Everything. He created the Garden of Eden, he created the animals, and then he created a human being. When he created Adam, then the Bible records, and there was found no help meet for him. There was no match for him. There was no one like him that could be found in the creation of God at the time. This included the animals. When God then recorded that in Scripture, there's a couple of things for us to appreciate the significance of that statement. Number 1, let's consider the environment of Adam. He was in nature. So we can conclude no amount of time that he spent in nature could close the void of one like him. Number 2, he was among animals. We can conclude, therefore, no amount of time among the animals could close the void of having one like him. Number 3, he was being visited by angels regularly. We can therefore conclude that no amount of time with the angels could close the void of being with one like him. Number 4, God himself could speak to him face to face. And here I dare to say, no amount of time with God could close the gap for one like him. Even God looked at the guy and said, it is not good for a man to be alone. So God is not threatened by the sociological needs of humanity. He created us that way. He created us with a balance with nature, with animals, and a need for human being and a need for God in our lives. All of these have a place for our survival and in our lives. It is therefore important that we take none of these for granted. The absence of nature will harm us. Nothing can close nature's place in our lives. No amount of time with God will take away the impact and the benefits of nature in our lives. No amount of time with humanity can take away the benefits of nature in our lives. All of these things are to be maintained in the balance. People have lost things and they have suffered grief from losing things. Grief is intense sorrow from loss. There are people who've lost jobs and it affected them intensely. People who've lost money and they could not function properly. People who've lost things that were valuable to them. But the greatest loss of a human being is another human being. And today we want to talk and find means and understanding of grief from loss and how we can actually heal from that. The loss of a person is hard. And if we then have an understanding of creation and the words that came from God that it is not good for a man to be alone, then we can appreciate the depth of the loss. Because even in the presence of God and that of angels, it was not sufficient for a human being. They still needed companionship and fellowship. We must not then make a mistake also to limit this to a romantic relationship. But however, there is significance that we can find in learnings that we can take from a romantic relationship, because that is the first relationship that is introduced to us in the Bible. And therefore, the Bible also records that a man and a woman shall be one flesh. When then people suffer divorce, one can appreciate the difficulty for those people to be the same again, because they were one flesh. Therefore, this is the tearing apart of one flesh, you can then imagine the pain and the impact that this will have and the scars that it will leave with these people. We can therefore understand and appreciate why people struggle to move on with their lives when they've lost their spouses to death, because this is the tearing apart of one flesh. These people have lost a part of themselves. In other words, grief leaves us never to be the same as the people that we were before we suffered the loss. But from grief, we can learn and take lessons that can help us to build ourselves, and we can become better people. If people are one flesh and they are separated, there is a feeling of incompleteness that they may feel. And we may be tempted to try and give them words for them to replace that. It is not possible. Let's take it in a practical sense. If I lose my arm, no amount of surgery can ever make me to be the same like I was before. I can be given an arm through theater and operations that can help me to function with one, but it can never be part of me as the previous arm that I have lost has been before. Losses are that of tearing apart of one flesh. Therefore, grief is something complex and very deep. We can then also think of it this way. If it is similar to losing a limb, and by the way, this is something concluded by some neurologists and people who specialize in the therapy of dealing with trauma, to which they also associate grief. In that, grief is also associated to something similar to losing a limb, as if you've lost a part of yourself, an arm or something. If we then consider it that way, it then means that we are, as people, if we suffer grief, it means that it's almost like we have a feeling and a desire to reach something, but we can't get to it because we've lost a limb. In other words, grief is not only just about pain, but it is a combination of two aspects. It's a combination of pain and desire. And this is something that Dr. David Kessler explains very well in his book, Finding Meaning in Dealing with Grief. Comprehensively, he deals with the subject. And that grief is a component of two sides. There is a side of desire, and also there is a side of pain. We often view grief as that of pain only. But what makes pain unbearable? It is that which we desire, we cannot get to. And the reason we cannot get to it is because there is a feeling of disbelief that this thing, I can almost feel it. I can feel it. Therefore, I feel like I can reach it, but my hand is not long enough. In other words, it's a feeling of a lost limb. I can't get to it. This is why many people, when they suffer loss of grief and suffer loss, particularly to death, then there is a side with certain people where there's refusal to move on with their lives. It's almost like some people feel like they owe it to the person that they love, that they feel still deeply within themselves and within their heart, they owe it to them to remain in pain, because then they are comfortable that they are faithful to the one that they have lost. But it is often that we find that in the explanation of Dr. Huberman in dealing with grief, that in our attempt to grieve for our loved ones that we have lost, we also find that we have a tendency to lose ourselves in the process. In other words, in the honor of pain that we want to keep with us because we feel faithful to the one that we have lost, then that sense of being faithful to pain then also leads us to losing ourselves. Because in their presence, we have never been people who harbor pain. We have been people who lived life to the fullest. But now, when we are happy, we feel like, no, we can't be happy to that extent because we must be faithful to this person that we have lost. Here's a story I want to share with you to drive the point I want to share with you today. Isaac loses his father, Abraham, and Isaac loses his mother, Sarah. And when he loses his parents, particularly at the loss of his mother, it seems that he was much closer to his mother than he was to his father. It goes without saying, they got him at a very late age, and therefore this was a boy much loved by his mother. And when he lost his mother, Isaac was deeply pained at the loss of his mother. But Abraham had given instruction to his servant that he must look for a wife for Isaac among the children of Israel, meaning somebody of the same belief and faith. This means that there was God's involvement and prayer in the choosing of a spouse for Isaac. In other words, in the appointment and choosing of a life partner for Isaac, God had something to do with it. If you want to find healing in relationships, include God to help you in a direction of associating with the right persons. Allow me not to limit this to only romantic relationships, because even he that found a spouse on behalf of Abraham was not a relationship that was romantic between him and Abraham, but it was a brotherly relationship, a commitment and a loyalty. We also have David and Jonathan, who the Bible records that they loved each other deeply, and David's life was saved on account of their relationship with Jonathan. So therefore, companionship is not only limited to romantic relationship. We must have God guide us in wisdom and knowledge of who we must join ourselves to. Isaac has then a wife. Listen to the Bible in Genesis chapter 24, the verses 67. And Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent and took Rebekah. And she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. And Isaac took Rebekah to be his wife. He took her into his mother's tent. And Isaac loved her deeply. And Isaac was comforted. Those are all important points. Finding the wife, we've spoken about finding the right person, involving God in finding the right person in your life, whether it's a friend or business person, a friend or spouse or life partner. He or she must be in connection with having God guide you in his wisdom. Isaac took her as his wife into his mother's tent. Now this was a place of vulnerability for Isaac. He had lost his mother, and he was extremely vulnerable on the subject of the loss of his mother. But he, finding the right person, opened up to her and let her in to his mother's tent. There is significance into Isaac letting Rebekah into Sarah's tent, the mother of Isaac, allowing people into your space of vulnerability. At which point do we do that? At which point do we move on? When we move on with our lives, does it mean we have completely healed? It is after Isaac let her in that the Bible records that he loved her deeply, and thereafter recording that he was then comforted. So, letting people in is the beginning and the part of healing. We cannot completely heal without letting people in. And healing does not mean replacement. Healing means comforted. To be comforted, not to replace. We often take responsibility as human beings at the suffering of grief and loss. And the responsibility that we take is this. We feel responsible either for the loss of those people. We often feel like we could have done maybe something to prevent their loss and their death. And sometimes, perhaps, possibly, yes. But what guarantee is there? If you had done what you think you should have done, that they would still be alive. Often we carry burdens upon us to think that there are things that we could have done to stop the death of certain people. Perhaps we may be right, we may be wrong. But what guarantee is there? If you did what you think you should have done, would they still be alive today? None of us can guarantee that. So the first step of allowing people into our spaces of vulnerability is firstly to be kind to ourselves, to be fair to ourselves, to accept the things that are beyond our control, things that we cannot change. Once time has passed, it is a cruel master. That time is not going to come back to us. It is gone. Isaac, after letting her in, then the Bible says he loved her deeply. After the love of his mother, he was able to love her deeply. You can love again, even after a great loss, even after grief, you can love again. And it is not a sign of betrayal for you to let people into the tent of the person you lost. It is not a sign of unfaithfulness for you to allow people into your space of vulnerability. You can love again. For Isaac loved again, and he did so deeply after finding somebody that God had directed him to be joined to. Listen to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4 to verse 7. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. Love never fails. Those are beautiful words. Have you ever experienced love like that? Love that is kind, patient, does not seek its own, preserving love, comforting love. This is the true love. Rebekah gave this kind of love to Isaac, and he was comforted. He was comforted. How do we heal from the scars? How do we heal from losing a limb? The Japanese have a method of fixing broken pots, or pottery rather. And they have a term called kintsugi, I don't know how to pronounce it, kintsugi, that they use, where they take the broken pottery and they do not throw it away. They put all the pieces together again into one place, collect all of them. And all that they do is that they get powdered gold and they use it as a paste to put those broken pieces together. When you and I now see those broken pottery put together, what we see are glittering scars of gold that join these broken pieces together. Yes, it is possible for your scars to glitter, for you to heal and find comfort and be an even much better person from scars, to even be a much more beautiful person from scars. Scars have created beautiful people in this world. So how and what role does God play in our lives? Jeremiah 18, verse 1 to verse 6. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Go down to the potter's house, and there I will give you my message. So I went down to the potter's house, and I saw him working at the wheel. But the pot he was shaping from the clay was mud in his hands. So the potter formed it into another pot, shaping it as it seemed best to him. Then the word of the Lord came to me. He said, Can I not do with you, Israel, as this potter does, declares the Lord? Like clay in the hands of the potter, so are you in my hand, Israel. This is a beautiful verse. I'm closing with God's healing. God says to Jeremiah, go to the potter's house. There you will find the potter doing his thing. And certainly Jeremiah sees the potter and he watches him. The potter is putting clay together, making a pot out of it. But it falls apart in his hands, in the hands of the potter. The clay fell apart. How can God's people get sick? In the hands of the potter. The clay fell apart. How can God's people lose their loved ones? In the hands of the potter. The clay fell apart. How can God's people have mental depression and anxiety? In the hands of the potter, God's people can also be like the clay. But God says, but that was not the end of it. Then the potter picked up the clay and he reshaped it into another pot. God can shape us when our pieces are broken. Similar to the Japanese, he can put the pieces back together and reshape us with glittering scars, though they may never go away until he comes again. When he shall wipe away all tears from our eyes, he can reshape the pot of our lives. He can reshape our characters. He can reshape our lives. He can give us healing and comfort. 2 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 3 to verse 4 talks about God as the God of all comfort. Of all comfort, we can find comfort in God. He can give us peace. He can give us comfort. God is a God of comfort. We may fall apart, but remember, we are still in the hands of God. And if we are still in His hands, He can reshape us again, put the pieces together, and we shall be glittering with scars, though they may be there. When we get to heaven, they shall ask, "Who are these?" And it shall be said, "These are they who have come out of great tribulation, but they have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb," reshaped. And now they are putting on white robes as if they have never been in this world of sin. May God give us healing. May God give us eyes and ears that are divine for us to hear when the vulnerable speak, for us to see the vulnerable, for us to have healing hands to be kind in touch and comforting the vulnerable. Healing from losses is possible with God's help. May God bless you.